For lesson 7.4, we are going to be reviewing how to solve inequalities. So just a reminder, an inequality has many answers. Unlike an equation that has mostly just one answer, and sometimes it has more or none, inequalities are always going to have multiple, so many answers. And we're going to use either an open or a closed circle. So if I have a strictly less than or strictly greater than, we're going to have an open circle because that means it can be, like, for example, it can be greater than 3, but that means it could be 3.1, but it can't be exactly 3. So we want to leave an open circle because that would not be included. Or we have a closed circle. If I have a less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, now it can equal those numbers. For example, greater than or equal to 3, it could be 3 or 4 or 5 and so on. And then after we put our numbers on the number line and we determine if we're going to have an open or a closed circle, then we're going to do our shading. And if we have greater than or equal to, we're going to be shading towards the right because as we go right on the number line, numbers get bigger and bigger or greater. And then if you have a less than or equal to, we're going to be shading left on the number line because as we have something that's less getting smaller, those numbers are on the left side of the number line. And then there's one thing we need to note with that is really important, is most of our answers are going to look like x is greater than 3, for example. And in this case, I noticed that we have the greater than sign, so I would want to shade to the right. However, we might have a problem that looks like this. 3 is less than x. And actually, those two things are exactly the same. So we're going to add a note off to the side over here in the shading. Variable has to be on the left. If you want to use that rule, when to shade right, when to shade left, you need to have that variable on the left. And if I look closely at these, I'm noticing that this big side faces towards the x in this top one, and in the bottom one, the big side still faces towards the x. That's because the x is the bigger number. 3 is the smaller number. So if you have a problem like this bottom one, you can always rewrite it by flipping the whole thing around. You flip the entire thing around, including the inequality sign, and then you can use that shortcut to tell to shade right or shade left. And then our last thing is with negative coefficients. And a coefficient is a number in front of the variable. So if we have a negative number, let's see, if we multiply or divide by a negative. Multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. So if it was less than and you multiply or divide by negative, it's going to become greater than. If it was greater than or equal to and you multiply or divide by negative, it becomes less than or equal to. And we'll look at a couple examples of that towards the bottom here. Okay, for our first set of examples, we're going to graph on a number line. So we're first just going to draw our number line. I'm going to just put my number that I need in the middle. So in this case, 5. And then if I imagine what this number line would be like, this could be 6, 7, 8. If I go backwards, it would be 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. Okay, so I have strictly greater than 5. So it cannot be equal to 5. So because of that, 5 is not included. So an open circle at the 5. And then all values that are greater than, these numbers are greater than 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. Number 2, I'm going to go draw our number line again. I'm going to put my negative 2 in the middle. Negatives are a little bit harder. If I count, this would be negative 1, 0, positive 1. So this way goes negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, and so on. So negatives are a little bit different. This is less than or equal to. So this time it can be equal to. So I'm going to fill in, and I want values for y that are less than that. So on the number line, less than, the smaller numbers are on the left, always. Number 3, this is like what we talked about over here. I'm going to flip this around. It's actually the exact same question. So I'm going to flip it around. X, the small side faces towards the x. I want the small side facing towards the x still. And then the 3. So I flipped everything around, got flipped, including the inequality sign. And now I can use those rules we talked about up in the vocab. So it is strictly less than, so open circle, and the values that are smaller than or less than 3 are going to be to the left. And then we've got one last problem like this. This time it's 0, so put the 0 in the middle. This one is greater than or equal to, so if it has that line underneath the or equal to part, we're going to fill it in. That means 0 is included. And values that are greater than 0 are going to be off to the right. And now we're going to solve. So these are going to be very similar to how we do equations, which is this one rule different, that if we multiply or divide by negative, we have to flip the inequality sign. Otherwise, we're doing it the same way. Okay, so I want to add or subtract first. So the opposite of plus 6 is minus 6. So that gives me 2x is less than 22 minus 6 is 20. Oh my gosh, 16? Okay, and then this is 2 times x, so the opposite is divide. So x is less than 8. I did not divide by negative, I divided by positive 2, so I left my sign as is. Number 6, I'm going to add 7. The opposite of minus 7 is plus 7. Drop down that minus 3x, or negative 3x, greater than or equal to 12. And now I need, this is being multiplied by negative 3. So the opposite to divide by negative 3. But I notice here that I'm dividing by a negative, so I'm going to have to flip that sign around. Oops, that sign around when I do this. So x, and I'm going to flip this around to be less than or equal to, and then 12 divided by negative 3 is negative 4. Number 7. This one looks a little bit different because that x is in the second spot here. So I need to get rid of this minus 4 first. And the opposite of minus 4 is plus 4. And then on the 5, that minus sign is attached to that 5. So minus 5x becomes negative 5x is less than or equal to 25. I'm going to divide by negative 5 again. So again, I'm dividing by a negative. So I'm going to have to flip that sign around. X is, this becomes greater than or equal to negative 5. And our last problem, the x is on the other side, but we're still going to do the same way. I'm going to do whatever's close to the x first. This plus 1 is minus 1. That gives me 6 is greater than negative 6x. Then I'm going to divide by negative 6, and I'm noticing that there's that thing again, I'm dividing by a negative, so I have to flip the sign. So x is, and then this is going to flip around to be this sign. 6 divided by negative 6 is negative 1. And then if I were to graph this, I could flip this whole inequality around, move the x over here, x, the big side still faces the x, and negative 1 goes on the other side. So if you did need to graph it, that could help you graph it.